The croissant is not French. It never was. The story you know, bakers of Vienna, 1683, shaping bread into a crescent to mock the Ottoman flag, has no primary source, not one. It was written down for the first time in 1938, and I found the man who invented it. 2 months tracing every primary source from that siege to a Paris bakery of 1839 to bring you this. The pastry on your plate this morning is not a French tradition. It is a story history rewrote. Everyone will tell you the croissant is French, but its real creator was an Austrian artillery officer who opened his Paris bakery in 1839, and he did it a full century after Marie Antoinette was supposed to have brought it there. Vienna, September 1683. The city is under siege. 200,000 Ottoman soldiers surround the walls. And past midnight, in a cellar under a baker is kneading dough by candlelight. He hears a sound, a low scraping under the stone floor. He presses his ear down and realizes what it is. Ottoman sappers, tunneling under the walls of Vienna. He runs. He raises the alarm. The tunnel is destroyed, the city is saved, and when the Ottomans retreat, the emperor grants the bakers of Vienna the right to shape a new bread. They shape it into a crescent, the symbol of the Ottoman flag, so that every morning the people of Vienna could eat their enemy for breakfast. That is the story. It is printed in the Larousse Gastronomique, the most authoritative French cookbook of the 20th century. It is repeated by National Geographic, by Rivi, by Europeana, by nearly every walking tour of Paris, by every French bakery blog on the internet. Chalkboards and bakeries from Tokyo to Buenos Aires still tell it today. Then there is version 2. Marie Antoinette, Austrian by birth, marries the future king of France in 1770 and brings the kipferl with her to Versailles. Europeana teaches it. El Debate repeats it. Cultural institutions across Europe present it as fact, and there is version 3. Same siege, same tunnel, same crescent, but this time in Budapest, in 1686. 3 origin stories, 3 cities, 3 different dates, all of them printed as history by the most respected food institutions in the world. And here is the problem. They cannot all be true. Only one of them can be the origin of the croissant, or none of them can. Because when a historian went looking for the earliest mention of the word croissant in the French language, he did not find it in 1683. He did not find it in 1770. He did not find it in any French cookbook, any royal inventory, any siege chronicle, any dictionary from either of those centuries. What he found instead was silence, complete silence, until a single line, buried in a manual of food chemistry, in the year 1853. His name is Jim Chevalier. He is not a Michelin chef. He is not a French institution. He is an American food historian who spent years reading every French cookbook, every dictionary, every siege chronicle he could find. In 2009, he published his conclusion in a book titled simply Auguste Zang and the French Croissant. The word croissant appears in print, in French, for the first time in the year 1853, in a manual of food chemistry by François Anselme Payen. He spells it croissants with a typo. 10 years later, Émile Littré adds it to his dictionary of the French language as the 12th possible meaning of the word. 12th. Only in 1869 does Pierre Larousse write a real definition. A small bread in the shape of a crescent, which means that in 1683, when Vienna was supposedly under siege and its bakers were supposedly inventing the crescent to mock the Ottomans, the word did not exist in French. It did not exist a century later, when Marie Antoinette supposedly carried it to Versailles. It did not exist in her royal inventories. It did not exist in the kitchen books of Louis XVI. For almost 200 years, in the country that is supposed to have invented it, the croissant has no name. But the kipferl does. In Vienna, the kipferl, a dense, crescent-shaped bread roll, is documented from the 13th century onward, 400 years before the siege, 400 years before the alarm in the tunnel, 400 years before the bakers who supposedly invented what had already existed for centuries. So how does an Austrian bread become a French icon? The answer arrives in Paris in the autumn of 1839. His name is Auguste Zang. He is 32 years old. He is a former artillery officer in the Austrian Imperial Army. He has no experience as a baker. He does have savings, ambition, and a plan. He rents a storefront at 92 Rue de Richelieu, a few blocks from the Palais Royal. He installs a steam oven, a technology unknown to French bakers. He imports a mechanical dough mixer. He refuses French sourdough starter and orders brewer's yeast from Vienna instead. He opens a bakery and calls it the Boulangerie Viennoise, the Viennese bakery. He sells kipferl. He sells Viennese rolls. He sells the pastries of his home city. Within weeks, Paris is talking. The writer Sainte-Beuve sends a letter to a friend that survives to this day. We are all to go eat some cake Tuesday at a very splendid and very delectable Viennese bakery. That very splendid Viennese bakery is Zhang's. By the following year, 12 competing Viennese bakeries have opened across Paris. 100 specialized workers are baking Viennese bread for the French bourgeoisie. 5 years after that, the number is 250, organized into a professional association meeting in the Passage des Panoramas. But look closely at what Zhang was actually selling in 1839. It was not the croissant you know. It had no flaky layers. It had no butter folded through the dough. It was a dense, enriched roll, a kipferl. The pastry on your plate this morning, light, crisp, folded 27 times over, was still decades away. Something had to change, something technical, something no siege story and no royal marriage can explain. 27 times over. That is what a modern croissant is. A sheet of dough, folded in on itself, wrapped around a slab of butter, rolled out, folded again, and again, and again. 27 layers of dough alternating with 27 layers of butter, like the pages of a book. 25 to 30% of the finished pastry is pure butter, laminated inside the dough itself. Now compare that to a kipferl. A kipferl is bread, enriched bread, softened with milk and egg, but bread. One dough, no butter folded in, no layers. When you bite a kipferl, it is dense. When you bite a croissant, it shatters. The difference is not the shape. Both are crescents. The difference is not the ingredients. Both use flour, water, yeast, salt, and butter. The difference is a technique called lamination. And lamination is not baking. Lamination is engineering. You take chilled butter. You wrap it in chilled dough. You roll it flat. You fold it in 3, like a letter. You chill it. You roll it again. You fold it again. You chill it 3 or 4 times. Each fold multiplies the layers exponentially. When you bake the result, the water in the butter turns to steam. The steam pushes the layers apart. What was flat becomes hollow, crisp, and impossibly light. Now the question is when this happened. When did an Austrian yeast bread become a French laminated pastry? The paper trail is precise, and it is short. In 1889, Joseph Favre publishes his Dictionnaire universel de cuisine. He includes a croissant recipe. It is not the pastry you know. It uses ground almonds and sugar. It reads more like an Ottoman confection than a Paris breakfast. It has no lamination. 1 year later, Auguste Colombier publishes the Nouvelle Encyclopédie culinaire, and inside, for the first time in the historical record, there is a croissant recipe that uses laminated dough, chilled butter, repeated folds. The technique is fully described. The Austrian bread has crossed a line it will never cross back. Except Escoffier, the man who defined French cuisine for the 20th century, publishes his Guide culinaire in 1903, and he mentions the croissant, but not the laminated technique. 13 years after Colombier, the highest authority in French cooking still does not treat lamination as the definition. 12 more years pass. In 1915, a baker named Sylvain Claudius Goy publishes what the Institute of Culinary Education recognizes today as the definitive early French recipe for the croissant with laminated dough, the template that fixes the pastry in its modern form. Which means the croissant, as you know it, is not from 1683. It is not from 1770. It is not even from 1839. The pastry on your plate was invented sometime between 1890 and 1915, in Paris, by French bakers building on an Austrian shape and an Austrian roll, with a technique that had nothing to do with Vienna. But knowing when the technique arrived is not the same as knowing how the pastry became French in the mind of the entire world. In 1890, when Colombier wrote down the first true recipe, the croissant was still known abroad as a Viennese specialty. Something had to happen after that. Something that had nothing to do with dough, to erase Vienna from the story completely. In the spring of 1848, the man who brought Viennese bread to Paris does something no one expected. He sells his bakery. He hands the keys to a Frenchman named Philibert Jacquet, and Auguste Zhang gets on a train and goes home to Vienna. He never bakes again. He founds a newspaper called Die Presse. He gets rich in banking and mining. He dies a wealthy Austrian businessman who once, briefly, ran a bakery in Paris. And the shop he opened on the Rue de Richelieu, the one that changed Paris breakfast forever, continues without him, under a French owner, then another French owner, then dozens more. The Austrian who introduced the pastry walks away from it. Within a single generation, no one in Paris is calling it Viennese anymore. Favre, Colombier, Goy, 3 French bakers, 3 French cookbooks, 26 years, and by the time the last page is printed, the croissant has a French name, a French technique, and a French identity. The word viennoiserie survives, literally, things from Vienna. But it becomes a category label, not a memory. The meaning drains out. Then in 1920, the French government does something no country has ever done to a pastry before or since. It officially recognizes the croissant as a national product of France. The state seal, made in France. The Austrian bread is dead. The French croissant is born by decree. 25 years later, the Second World War ends. American soldiers pass through Paris by the millions, and the tourists follow. The 1950s, the 1960s, sitting at sidewalk cafés, ordering croissants with coffee. To them, the croissant is Paris. Paris is the croissant. No one is telling them about Zhang. No one is telling them about the kipferl. The Vienna origin is not just forgotten, it is erased. By the 1980s, British supermarkets start stocking them. By the 1990s, London cafés serve them beside espresso. In New York and San Francisco, they have already been on menus for half a century. In Argentina, immigrants have turned them into the media luna, sweeter, denser, glazed with syrup. Every country adopts the croissant as if it had always been French, because by the time it arrives, no other origin story is available. Then in the 1970s, a French company called Pasquier does something the medieval Viennese baker could never have imagined. It freezes croissant dough. It ships it in refrigerated trucks. It sells it to supermarkets across Europe. Harry's follows. Auchan follows. Carrefour follows. Every major French retailer builds a factory line. By 2025, the global market for frozen croissant dough is worth more than $5 billion a year. 70% of the croissants sold in France today are not made by a baker anymore. They are made in a factory, frozen, trucked, reheated in your local bakery an hour before you walked in this morning. The croissant on your plate was almost certainly born on an assembly line in the 1970s. Not in Vienna, not in 1683, not by a baker with a lantern in a tunnel. Which raises a question almost no one asks. If the croissant was really invented in Paris between 1890 and 1915, if the whole world only agreed it was French after the Second World War, if 70% of the ones sold today come out of a factory built 50 years ago, then where did the story of the Vienna siege come from? Someone had to write it down, someone had to place it in the historical record, and when you trace it back through every French cookbook, every American food magazine, every tourist brochure that ever repeated it, they all lead to the same book, the same author, the same year. And the year is not 1683. The book was called the Larousse Gastronomique. The year was 1938. The author of the article on the croissant was a food writer named Alfred Gottschalk. Gottschalk was compiling the definitive French culinary encyclopedia. Every dish, every pastry, every origin. And when it came to the croissant, he needed a story, so he told one. He wrote that the croissant was invented in Budapest in 1686 during the Ottoman siege. The bakers heard the tunnel. The bakers gave the alarm. The city was saved, and the bakers were rewarded with a crescent-shaped roll. 10 years later, Gottschalk publishes a second book on the history of food. He tells the same story, the tunnel, the alarm, the bakers, the crescent. But now the city is Vienna. Now the year is 1683. Same author, same story, different city, different date, contradicting himself in print. He never explained why he changed it. He never issued a correction. He simply published the second version and moved on. And of the two, the second one, Vienna 1683, is the version the world still remembers today. Every walking tour of Paris that tells you the tunnel story. Every National Geographic article that repeats it. Every raft segment. Every Europeana entry. Every French bakery blog. Every chalkboard from Tokyo to Buenos Aires. All of them are quoting one man, one book, one year. And a version of that story he had already contradicted himself in another. Because when Jim Chevalier went back to the primary sources, every chronicle of the Siege of Vienna, every soldier's diary, every imperial report, every letter that survives from 1683, he found no baker, no tunnel warning, no crescent bread. He read every French cookbook printed between 1683 and 1850. The croissant is not in any of them, and when he opened the royal inventories of Versailles, every menu of Louis XVI, every account book of the Queen's kitchen, every meal recorded in the 18 years Marie Antoinette lived in that palace, no croissant appears, not on her wedding table, not on her breakfast tray, Not on the morning she was arrested. Marie Antoinette died in 1793. The word croissant would not enter the French language for another 60 years, which is what makes the whole thing extraordinary. The Austrian bread crossed the border into Paris in 1839. The French technique of laminated dough was written down in 1890. The French state declared the croissant a national product in 1920. And the story that welded all of it together, the tunnel, the crescent, the emperor's reward, was written down for the first time in 1938 by a food writer who could not decide whether it happened in Budapest or Vienna, and whom the entire world has been quoting ever since without checking. Which raises a question no bakery, no cookbook, no French guidebook has ever really answered. What are you actually eating when you eat a croissant? Look at any French bakery window, any of them. Paris, Marseille, Lyon, or your local one, wherever you are watching this from. Look at the sign. Right there, painted next to boulangerie or pâtisserie, is one more word: viennoiserie, Vienna. It is written on every French bakery in the world, in gold letters, in cursive script, above the door, on the menu board, on the paper bag they hand you with your croissant inside. The word for the entire category of French breakfast pastries is a French word that means, literally, things from Vienna. The whole story is hiding in plain sight, in one word that everyone reads and no one questions. Vienna, in gold letters, above a French door. And this is the pattern that makes the story of the croissant so much bigger than a pastry. Because a nation can adopt a food, fold it into its identity, print it in its official registers, serve it to tourists as heritage, and still leave the fingerprint of where it really came from on the sign above the door, for 100 years, without anyone reading it. Which is why the croissant is not the strangest case of this. It is not even close. There is a dish so famous it is the most ordered item on Chinese takeout menus in the United States. It is named after a 19th century Chinese general who died fighting for the Qing dynasty. Every American who eats it believes they are eating something China invented. They are not. It is not a dish anyone in China has ever recognized. The general it is named after would not have known what it was. And the story of who actually created it, and where, is stranger than the story you just heard. The next investigation is right there on the screen. Open it.